Welcome everyone to our channel, Egypt Travel Expert, a channel for elite traveler looking for a unique travel experience in Egypt. If you are lucky, come on board and have the trip of your dreams. Today we are visiting the temple of Luxor, the most beautiful temple on the Nile River. Luxor Temple was never a standalone temple. Actually, it started as a celebrational shrine attached to Karnak Temple to celebrate Egypt's most important festival, the Apet festival, in the month of July every year. The solid gold statue of god Amun is carried in a big procession by the priests, and it is preceded by the king of Egypt, and then it marches through the Sphinx Avenue that extends for 2 miles south to the southern temple of Luxor. That's why it was called Epit Receipt, or the south residence of god Amun. And the statue of god Amun stays in Luxor Temple for 24 days, during which the Egyptians celebrated the festival of Apet, sacrificing and dancing and playing music, often attended by the king himself. And when the festival ends 24 days later, the procession of god Amun returns back to the temple of Luxor, the temple of Karnak, in a majestic celebration preceded by the king. And this way the gods of Egypt will be pleased, and it will grant the Egyptian a successful cultivation year and a wealthy harvest. And that's why the temple was equipped by a 2-mile luxurious Sphinx Avenue that extends for 2 miles and contains 1,200 statues of sphinxes with the faces of Egyptian kings such as King Amenophes III, King Ramses II, and Nakhtaneb. The name of the temple during the Muslim time changed to the city of Luxor, or the city of palaces, as the Arabs, when they visited the city, they thought that all these big temples were actually the palaces where the Pharaoh of Egypt lived, and that's why the city was called the City of Palaces, or Luxor. The Egyptian government, with the help of the UNESCO, worked in removing many modern buildings that covers the Sphinx Avenue in order to discover what have remained out of these amazing statues and reconnect the two temples once more 2,000 years after they were split. Many believe that Luxor Temple is the greatest temple in the land of Egypt. It started as a small shrine 4,000 years ago. However, during both the Middle and the New Kingdom, the temple acquired a special importance, especially after the kings of Egypt during the 12th dynasty started dealing with god Amun as the national formal god of the state of Egypt, and he became the king of all gods. And this meant that the size of the temple of god Amun in Karnak increased, and the kings of Egypt built many monuments, and of course this made Karnak the biggest temple in Egypt, and that reflected of course on its younger brother Luxor. It became much bigger, and the number of the kings who built monuments in it increased, and it is dedicated for Amun Kamotef. And Amun Kamotef is the fertility form of god Amun Ra. And the facade of the temple is decorated with 6 statues 4 standing made out of red granite, and 2 seated made out of basalt for King Ramses II, built 1260 before Christ. 2 obelisks were standing in front of the temple. One of them had been transferred to Paris in 1830, which is now standing at La Place de la Concorde in Paris. After Champollion deciphered the ancient Egyptian language of the hieroglyphic, he established the Department of Egyptology in the University of Sorbonne. And he asked the French government to construct 2 obelisks at the gateway to the Louvre Museum, which acquired already lots of Egyptian antiques. However, the difficulty of moving the first obelisk and the incredible expense of the transportation process that exceeded 40,000 sterling pounds, and the early demise of Jean-Francois Champollion caused the cancellation of the moving of the second obelisk, and therefore the French had to relocate the obelisk to a different place. Therefore they started considering placing the obelisk in a square in Paris, and the notorious ominous square of the Place de la Concorde in Paris was chosen. This square has a very ominous reputation, as many of the French nobles and the King of France, Louis, and his wife Marie Antoinette were executed during the French Revolution. And as a message of peace, the French government built the obelisk in the same place of the guillotine. The obelisk in France was decorated with a gold cap on top, similar to the beautiful gold pyramid cap that once covered that obelisk during the time of King Ramses II. The obelisk reaches 70 feet high and it weighs 240 tons from the red granite from Aswan quarries. The facade of the Luxor Temple is decorated with inscriptions representing Ramses II big victory over his enemies, the Hittites, during the famous Battle of Kadesh, 1260 BC. And we will be discussing that obelisk in detail during our video about the Ramesseum Temple. Behind the pylon of the facade, there is a beautiful shrine from the time of Queen Hatshepsut and King Thutmose III, and it is preceded by 4 red granite pillars in the papyrus design. It is the most beautiful in the whole temple. You cannot but notice when you enter the first court the suspended mosque on the left-hand side, and it was constructed 600 years to celebrate the memory of Sidi Abu al-Hajjaj, a renowned Muslim figure, lived in the city of Luxor and highly prized by the people of Luxor because of his knowledge in Islam religion and good relationship with the people. After he died, in the same place where he lived, the mosque was established on top of the ruins of the temple of Luxor, which have been submerged by sand and mud accumulated through hundreds of years of the flooding of the river Nile. The mosque seemed to be suspended or hanging on air after the Egyptian government, with the help of the French Institute for Oriental Antiquities, removed the mud and the sand and the debris from the temple, leaving the mosque standing 15 feet above the head of the visitors during the 19th century. The mosque is such a beautiful small mosque where the Pharaonic decoration integrated with the Muslim architectural element in a symphony that rarely exists in any archaeological site in the world. Don't forget to visit the mosque before or after your visit to the temple, where you can take a panoramic photo for the temple from the terrace of the mosque. The first open court is surrounded by two arcades of papyrus pillars built out of sandstone during the time of King Ramses II, with total number of 64. Between the pillars there is fantastic closest statues of King Ramses II made of red granite, standing left leg forward in a military position. And sometime we can see on the side a small representation of King Ramses II most beloved wife, Queen Nefertari. Nefertari is one of 35 wives that Ramses II had during his long life that extended for 92 years. It is quite awkward that all the wives that Ramses had never had the same respect, love, and honor that Queen enjoyed a very special place in the heart of Ramses. He built her a special tomb in the Valley of Queens, discovered by Saccarelli during the beginning of the 20th century. Also, he built her a small temple in Abu Simbel, where the queen was worshipped together with her favorite goddess Hathor, beside many statues and inscriptions that represent Queen Nefertari together with her husband, King Ramses II. Ramses remained devoted to Nefertari's memory after she died, and he did not allow any of his other wives to be represented standing next to him, and most of her royal duties were granted to a couple of Ramses II daughters, so as no other woman would occupy the same position that Nefertari once did. On the right hand side of the front wall we can see an inscription that represents the facade of Luxor Temple, where we can see the Bailin, the 6 statues, and the 2 obelisks, and the flags that were standing in front of the temple. A rare inscriptions that we haven't seen a lot in the Egyptian architecture. At the gateway to the 14-pillar hall, we can see 2 seated statues made of basalt for King Ramses II, with a very interesting inscriptions that represent God Habi, the god of the Nile in ancient Egypt, standing tying the knot of unity, the Sema Tawi. And we can see a list of names of cities that Ramses has captured in his military campaign to Asia. Through to the 14-pillar hall, which is distinguished by 2 rows of pillars with papyrus design, 7 on each side, and it is 75 foot high each, decorated with fantastic decoration on its walls representing the great festival of the flooding season, the Alpet, that takes place in July every year. And we can see a big procession preceded by King Ramses II and his children, and the decoration showing Ramses, though originally this hall was created by King Amun III. Just at the entrance to the hall, we can see fantastic statues made out of alabaster for god Amun from the time of King Amenophis. We can also see the names of Tutankhamun and Merembetah written on the walls of this hall. Here we can see that the procession of the gold statue of god Amun is actually sailing across the river Nile to a small harbor on the side of Luxor Temple, but we can still see its stones on the side of the river Nile. And it seems that the Egyptians choose to take the statue on a big boat to Luxor Temple to avoid the big crowd blocking the procession walking through the Sphinx Avenue. The open court created by King Amenophis III contains 74 pillars, 2 rows on each side, decorated with papyrus design, and it looks much more elegant and much more beautiful than the cylinder-shaped pillars for the first open court built by Ramses II. It is made out of sandstone. At the right-hand side corner of this court, we have discovered in the year 1989 several statues buried by the priest of the temple to protect them from being destroyed during the Persian invasion. The statues are now in Luxor Museum, representing King Amenophis and King Hormuheb and other kings from the 18th dynasty, and also statues representing god Amun. Then we proceed to the colonnade of this temple. The colonnade of this temple consists of 32 pillars divided into 4 rows, each contain 8 pillars. And we go through the colonnade to a very special hall that once its roof was supported by 8 pillars that have been removed during the Christian times. The walls of this hall have been covered with a thick layer of plaster decorated with Christian decoration. However, some of these decoration has fallen off, revealing the amazing colorful decoration which is representing King Amenophis together with god Amun and other gods giving offerings. The recent restoration revealed the beautiful Christian Byzantine decoration that once covered this hall. The gateway leading to the Holy of Holies have been sealed, and then an altar flanked by 2 Corinthian red granite pillars was placed so the Christian could use that section of the temple as a church starting from the 5th century. We can proceed now through a small entrance in the altar into the most beautiful hall in the temple. This hall ceiling is supported by 4 papyrus pillars and decorated with amazing colorful decoration that the recent restoration for this hall shows how amazing this decoration was. And it shows King Amenophis III giving offering in front of the sacred boat that carries the gold statue of god Amun, celebrating the Opet festival. Finally, we find ourselves in front of the Holy of Holies of this temple, and it bears a big surprise for us. The king that is represented on the walls of the Holy of Holies, though he looks Egyptian, is dressed like a pharaoh giving offering to god Amun. However, his name is not Egyptian. Actually, the cartouche where is the name of the king is written bears the name of Alexander the Great. And it seemed that the young king who invaded Egypt in the year 330 BC, chose to represent himself in front of god Amun, giving offering, showing himself devoted to the Pharaonic religion to acquire the love and respect of his subject, the conquered Egyptians. And that policy was followed by the Greek and the Roman kings who ruled Egypt for 1,000 years later. They all represented respectful in front of the Pharaonic gods and goddesses of Egypt, at least until the Christian time, as during the 5th century, the end of the 5th century, this temple was converted into a church. On the right hand side to the Holy of Holies, we can find a doorway to the divine birth room of King Amenophis III. And the divine birth decoration is a pharaonic tradition which is known since the Old Kingdom, as the king of Egypt often claimed that they are the children of gods to acquire respect and divinity of their subject. And there is another examples similar to this in the temple of Queen Hatshepsut of Deir el-Bahari, almost identical to these, the ones which is in Luxor Temple. And it seemed that Amenophis III copied these decoration, as it shows his mother, the Queen of Egypt, sitting in front of god Amun, who is inseminating the Queen in the same way the Holy Spirit inseminated Virgin Mary. And she got pregnant with a divine child that can be seen in front of god Khnom, the creator of human, and he is forming it with his hands out of clay. The queen stands in another scene, standing pregnant, surrounded by goddesses who are comforting her, taking her to deliver the holy child, Amenophis III. The Temple of Luxor is by far one of the most beautiful temples in Egypt, and it is always better to visit the temple just before sunset and enjoy the amazing change of light while you are inside the temple, so you can take photos for the beautiful scenes of the temple during both light and then later during night time, when the temple is illuminated by the lights, which shows an amazing, charming atmosphere. I hope you enjoyed our visit to Luxor Temple. Please subscribe, like, and comment our videos, and you can also suggest other places to visit in Egypt.